Managing a team of investigators just got easier with TrackOps, the all-in-one case management software. Are you ready to enhance case flows and drive efficiency? TrackOps offers powerful management and coordination tools to streamline workflows and communication, all designed to keep your team synchronized and focused on the task at hand. With TrackOps, you can easily distribute workloads, track individual performance, and ensure deadlines are met. Plus, the TrackOps mobile app allows investigators to access case activities on the go. And the TrackOps video app allows for simple and consistent timestamping, all included at no extra cost. Start streamlining your investigation process today. Visit trackops.com for a free 15-day trial and experience the power of efficient team management. TrackOps, empowering teams, simplifying management. The Campbell Group has teamed up with PI Perspectives to offer listeners top-notch, affordable insurance solutions. Private investigators can get insurance for their business for as low as $305 per year. Apply now at piperspectivesinsurance.com and receive a quote back within 24 hours. Do you enjoy our podcast and the guests we bring you? Since 2019, Matt and his team have done their very best to give you amazing shows each week. If you feel like our show has helped you to be a better investigator, or maybe even inspired you to become an investigator, please let us know. We're looking for testimonials. Drop Matt an email with a recorded 20 to 30 seconds of you talking about this podcast. You can also email him something verbal about the website. His email is matthews@satellitepi.com. And if you really feel blessed for having this content, consider supporting Matt and our show by joining Investigators Toolbox. You really have to see version 2.0. And at just 49 cents a day, it's a no-brainer. Now let's jump in to this week's episode. Welcome to this week's episode of PI Perspectives. Today's a special show. We finish up our three-part series focusing on the art of investigation revisited. This is the second volume of an amazing collection of investigators who each write a chapter on the characteristics it takes to be a successful investigative professional. The book is the brainchild of Dr. Chelsea Binns from John Jay College of Criminal Justice and celebrated investigator Bruce Sackman. On each show, we focus on several of the chapter writers. Now please welcome our first guest, Michael Bret Hood, and your host, private investigator Matt Spare.
And welcome to this segment of PI Perspectives, the Art of Investigation Revisited. This is part of our ongoing series where we're interviewing some of the authors for this amazing second edition, really handbook on the soft skills of investigative techniques. Today we've got Michael Bret Hood with us. Michael was writing about self-control. So I'm going to control myself and stop talking here and welcome you to the program. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on and chatting a bit about your topic and what you're writing about. So for folks who don't know who you are, why don't you just give me a brief overview of your background?
Sure. So I entered as an FBI special agent in 1991. Did that for 25 years, mostly worked all kinds of different cases. I was based in St. Louis, Missouri before, I like to say, I got paroled and moved to Fort Myers, Florida. And then my last 4 years, I'm going to show you I'm not that smart because I left Florida and moved outside of Washington, D.C. to teach leadership, ethics, and financial crimes at the FBI Academy. But I will add one caveat to that. It says, happy wife equals happy life. And she got tired of the heat. So that's why we moved up there. Retired in 2016. Ever since then, I've been a faculty member for the ACFE. I'm an adjunct professor of ethics, leadership, forensic accounting, and fraud examinations for the University of Virginia. And then I also do private consulting, training, stuff like that.
Awesome. That's great. What a career, man. You've kind of been all over the place. And it's weird that you say got tired of the heat because my spouse is the exact opposite, man. She's always cold. So she's not originally from the US. And we call it like frozen blood syndrome, like when it gets too cold out, like we need to go somewhere warm.
Oh, I'm all for that. But my wife, she's not.
Yeah. Well, things we do for love, right?
Exactly.
It's all good.
Like me, I married above my level. So I'm going to do
Yeah, definitely. I think anybody in this industry can say that. But we digress here. Really great and interesting that you do a lot of ethics training, and self-control is a big part of that, right? It's a big
Yes,
part of knowing, like, man, this doesn't really feel right, or I probably shouldn't be doing this, and it's such a gray area in what we do, because we're trying to accomplish that end goal, right? We're trying to solve that problem, understand how something happened, but then keeping in the back of our mind that it's got to be actionable. Whatever we do, they need to be able to use it in a court of law or whatever. If it's not actionable, it's kind of useless, right?
correct.
Yeah.
So
So,
it's,
go ahead.
the problem we have with this, and the research shows this, is that we try to be ethical, but what we don't realize is that there's certain things that happen in our brain that operate on an unconscious level. And we
Right.
talk about that in that chapter. We refer to Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he describes the brain's thinking in two different ways. And this is not with all decisions, but it certainly happens in investigations. The first system he refers to is called System 1, and that's your reactionary brain. So imagine you're driving down a road, you come around the corner and you see an animal in the middle of the road. Well, most likely you're going to move your foot to the brake and slam on the brakes or honk or something like that. You didn't even think about it. You just reacted to the stimulus in front of you. That's what he refers to as that System 1. Whereas if we go to System 2, that's your thinking brain. That's where you think before you act. So if you've ever bought a car before, you've negotiated back and forth, and eventually you come to a price, hopefully, that you like, or you just walk away from the transaction. Well, that's where you use your brain power. As an investigator, we think that we're using our brain power, that System 2, all the time, but research shows that 95% of our decisions are made with System 1, that unconscious brain. So even though we try to be ethical, sometimes even with self-control, it's hard to do so because we don't consciously understand what's happening.
Right. Yeah, it's a crazy balance,
Yes.
and you want to think that, the people around you, your parents, relatives, other peers, are influencing you to kind of make the right decision, but you never know, right? It's
Hope, it's
one would hope.
it's kind of fun because I mean, if you've interviewed somebody, especially you put in the time, you've worked on an investigation, and you finally come down to the suspect. It's time to do that suspect interview.
Right.
And when I teach interviewing classes, I ask my students, says, what's your goal in the suspect interview? And sometimes people say, my goal is to get a confession. Well, if you stop for a second and you think about that, what's the only acceptable outcome for you if that is your goal?
A confession.
Yes.
Right.
But when your goal is confession as opposed to obtaining the truth,
Right.
then that's when your System 1 can get in the way and get you to start doing things that you ordinarily wouldn't do.
Right. Yeah, and I think, like, in trying to build rapport, like keeping that in mind, that really, yeah, we can try and steer somebody in a certain way, and it's more along the lines of, creating the opportunity for them to say things in a way that are helpful for you. But you don't want to lead either, right?
Yeah.
So, planting those ideas, it's a slippery slope in what you're trying to do, right? You got to be super careful.
Yeah, it's people. One of the things I ask in a lot of my classes is, how many of you would confess to a crime that you didn't commit? And everybody says, there's no way I would do it. But yet the research shows that at least 33%, if not more, would do it given the right situation. So I think that's where that self-control comes in. I can influence people simply by the questions I ask, the way I phrase them, the way I frame the situation, and lead people to a certain answer. As an investigator, my job is to keep it as objective as possible. And that means trying to set aside my own personal interests, which are success. I want to be successful.
Obviously,
I want
right.
to solve the case. So I have to be careful in how I phrase the question, the things that I do, my body language, because that can inadvertently lead people to provide information that isn't necessarily true.
Right. Yeah. And, it's again, technique. You learn these things as you go. I mean, I would assume what you were teaching, like, this is the the elite of the elite, right, on how to do these things. And I've seen, in my line of work, people that have worked for me that have gone through training at the academy, not necessarily working for the FBI, but more like task force,
Yeah.
and they've gone and they've done the training, and like you see the techniques, you see the things that they've pulled from it, and you're like, wow, okay, this person, they know what they're doing, and it's impressitive.
The best teacher is mistakes.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, I've made so many mistakes. Get people to talk to you, say things, and you're like, that doesn't make sense. And then you go and do the investigation, and it actually is true. And it's
Sure.
one of the things I write about in my chapter in that book is there was a kid that we named Matt. And Matt, I mean, if you looked at the evidence, Matt was guilty. I mean,
I'm not liking this chapter already.
I had video. I had his driver's license.
Right.
It was a counterfeit check case. I had, seeing him walk in there, somebody coming up, giving his license, everything lined up. He put his thumbprint on the checks, which I hadn't had time to verify yet, but everything is said, he's guilty. I interviewed him for about 2 hours, and he kept saying, like, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And he kept, he did the classic thing where his denials got softer and softer.
Right.
And I didn't believe him. So, luckily, I didn't have the power of arresting him right away, because I would have. And so I said to him before I left, I said, Matt says, I'll be back. And he says, that's fine. And 2 days later, I'm sitting in my FBI office, and the secretary calls me and says, you have a visitor. And I'm like, I don't have anybody on my schedule today. She gives me his name. It was John. And she says, John wants to see you. And I recognize John immediately. He's one of my other counterfeit check guys.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, I'll talk to him. Go talk to him. He lays out everything for 2 hours, and he forgets Matt. And so I look at him. I said, John, you forgot something. And he's like, no. And I pushed across Matt's picture. And he looks at me and he says, oh, yeah, that's not Matt. That's so-and-so. It's Robert. And I'm like, what? He says, no, Matt had nothing to do with this. It's Robert. And what had happened was Robert and Matt looked exactly alike, even though they weren't related. I went and pulled the driver's license, and I was shocked to see two people look exactly
doppelgangers.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And so then I said, how did Robert get Matt's driver's license? And John knew. He said, we were walking to the beach, walking in between two cars. I happened to look down on the driver's seat, saw a driver's license, said, Robert, this looks just like you. He picks it up, puts it in his pocket. 6 months later, they start the counterfeit check scheme. Robert says, make my checks payable to Matt. So
nice.
if I would have had my wishes, I would have arrested Matt, taken him to jail, and later found out that he was completely innocent.
Wow.
And so what I learned from that is part of my self-control is I'm going to naturally, because of system one, I'm going to arrive at a certain conclusion as soon as you give me the facts, because I can't stop it. Yeah. But if I take the situation and try to reframe it. So for example, with Matt, I said, he's guilty. If I would have paused for a moment and said, well, I have evidence that he's guilty, but what kind of evidence could I find to say he's not guilty? Sure. And if I kind of flip that around, then I look at things from a different perspective, and that helps my self-control, because instead of just getting trapped into one way of thinking, I'm trying to look at it from 2 to 3 different ways. And most of the time, it all comes to the same conclusion. But there are times like Matt where I have inadvertently arrived to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah, and they teach that stuff when you're studying for law school, right?
Yes.
When you're going to take the LSAT, like that's a big deal of that, right? You considering alternate possibilities and not jumping to conclusions is a big marker for that. And I remember real long ago, like when I was, before I even started my business, I was working for an attorney, and he was about to start a trial, and he realized he did not have accident site photos. And this was up in the Bronx. And there's an elevated train in the middle of the road. So it's White Plains Road. And his client had made his client had gone, there was an intersection. He'd gone through the intersection and he got T-boned. And what had happened was his client, and I found this out later as I got to the site and, investigated, that this gentleman was heading north, made a U-turn because he realized he was going in the wrong direction, but didn't head into southbound traffic. So he made a U-turn in the northbound lane, not realizing that the subway that was above ground was splitting the road north and south, and started to travel in the southbound direction in the northbound lane. It was late at night, wasn't a lot of traffic. So he's got no traffic light when he hits the intersection because there's no traffic light heading south in that direction. He enters the intersection and pow, he gets T-boned. Right. And a traumatic brain injury, heavy craziness. And the attorney's like, oh, I'm gonna really make a lot of money on this case. This guy's like seriously injured. But then when I figured out the fact pattern, this was like through interviewing, and again, he's starting trial like a week later. This case was like 3 years old. And I'm like, I know exactly what happened. This is what happened. And he's like, they got like a $60,000 offer on the case. So I call up the attorney. I'm like, take the offer. Look, you're gonna lose this. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened, right? But like this attorney was so like dead up. Like there's no way that my guy is in the wrong here. But then when you get out and you start investigating it, and it literally took me, I don't know, a day to figure out exactly what happened. And these are the things that teach you, right? You got to consider all possibilities. A very wise attorney told me, always know how you're going to lose your case.
Yes.
Right. And then work your way back from it. So it's interesting facts to see how all that kind of comes together, right?
Yeah, so we have to keep that open mind, but it's difficult because consciously we don't even realize that we've already made a conclusion. And so having the self-control to go back and look at that from a different angle and say, what happens if you're wrong is an asset to investigators that is just provides so much benefit. Yeah.
And that's one of the problems also that I find in hiring people. So we're in the private industry, right? Not law enforcement, but I have a lot of former law enforcement that work with me, right? And one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest retrainings that we need to do is to open up their eyes to consider other possibilities, because you get that prejudice sometimes. Like, like I know this is how it happened. I've got 23 years on the force. Like nobody can tell me how this happened. I figured it out, right? And just getting rid of that behavior and them understanding that, okay, there's a different set of rules here. This is not a criminal case, right? This is liability. You got to look at something, from the civil side of it, right?
Yes.
No one's going to jail, but somebody was negligent, right?
Right.
It's a different line of questioning. It's a different way to go things. So like being able to have the self-control to understand the right questions you need to ask and develop the information in a way that's going to be helpful, right?
As human beings, we all succumb to our own biases. And it's natural. It's not a flaw in an investigator. It's something that all humans have. Yeah. And I teach a decision-making class. And what's fun is that the first question I ask the class is, how many of you want to be here? And everybody says, no, I don't want to be here. But within 2 hours, I have shown them through a couple of exercises that I do, I show them how they succumb to biases. And at that moment, they're like, holy crap, it did happen to me.
You're right. I am a terrible person. This is horrible.
And then we start the learning after that. And it's really valuable because, what it does is it makes you look at those cases, look at those angles from either a criminal liability, civil liability, who's at fault, what if this happened, what if this didn't happen, things like that, which can totally change your opinion of what happened.
Yeah. No, it's all amazing. So we're going to pull back here and kind of wrap things up because I don't want to give away too much from the chapter here. Michael, I really appreciate you coming on and just sharing a little bit. This is like fascinating. I feel like I could do a full episode on this. It's just such an interesting topic to talk about. So I want to encourage everybody to go out and get a copy of that book. It's The Art of Investigation Revisited. Dr. Chelsea Binns and Bruce Sackman are the editors for that. They've got an amazing bunch of authors that have given their time and their talents to help you with your soft skills and get better at your investigative technique. So we'll have contact information for Michael, how you can get a hold of him if you have any further questions in our show notes. But Michael, thank you so much for coming on, and sit tight, everybody, for the next segment.
Thank you so much for having me.
Take care.
After 4 years of development, Scope Now is proud to announce the release of Grid. Grid combines OSINT with real-time physical data to achieve new levels of intelligence gathering. Grid supports over 50 data types and hundreds of thousands of sources. Upgrade your OSINT capabilities with Grid and elevate your intelligence team today at scopenow.com. Check out the PI Institute of Education at piinstitute.com. Since 1989, Kelly Riddle has been teaching on subjects such as surveillance, nursing home investigations, insurance fraud, domestic investigations, hidden assets, and accident scene investigations. The PI Institute of Education is a featured learning partner in the investigatorstoolbox.com. So check out the free content on the site, then visit the Institute for more great savings on additional classes. Thank you, Michael Brett, for talking to us about self-control. Next up, Raj talks integrity. Here's Matt.
And we're back with another segment of PI Perspectives, the Art of Investigation Revisited. We're doing a segment here talking to the different authors that were involved in the book. This is the second version of this, the revisited version. And today I'm very happy to welcome Raj Dhanlall, who's from South Africa, actually. And he's not an investigator, he's a certified fraud examiner. And he had the exciting pleasure to write about integrity. So Raj, I want to welcome you to the program. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me, Matthew.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. And I always like getting an international perspective on things. And, before we started recording, you had mentioned integrity. You were clamoring to write about it. It was something that you're passionate about it. So before we jump into that topic, why don't you tell folks a little bit about your background and what you do?
So, Matthew, thank you. My background is that I'm an auditor, so perhaps that's why I jumped at integrity. And having been always interested in doing the right things, I found myself very quickly after having trained to become a chartered accountant or the equivalent of a CPA in the States. I found myself hooked by investigations, always probing to find what is behind what people are not wanting to tell you.
Right.
So what is not being shared, what is not being said. So I started off studying to become a certified internal auditor, and it was a natural progression to becoming a certified fraud examiner. And in that process, always found that when I did an audit, it took me into the nooks and crannies that clients didn't want me to go and look at.
Right.
Or for that matter, the client staff did not want me to look at. And quite often I found myself in the middle of some awkward spaces. Sometimes the client's being awkward, most times the perpetrator being awkward. And I was just a simple auditor, what they call a green tick hooligan, using the green pen and really trying to find things they don't want.
The terrible green pen.
Which we never used, by the way, throughout my auditing career.
Right.
We started looking at computers, and I was very disappointed because I wanted that green pen.
Sure. Right. Somebody will hook you up one day, man. Just keep at it. Keep working really hard, and one day you'll get that green pen.
Absolutely.
You bring up a good point there, because as a corporation or business owner, sometimes you do get nervous when somebody shows up for an audit, and to go through things. I've always approached it like, I want to know if I misunderstood something or I did something, filed it improperly or designated in a certain way it shouldn't be designated. Like I'm not saying, I'm going to get caught, it's jail time. It's like, no, you made a mistake on something and it really should be done this way. Just keeping the order of things. It's really, really important, actually, to do all that, right?
But that comes about if your intentions have been very honorable.
Right.
And what we know about fraudsters is their intentions aren't necessarily honorable in the eyes of the layman.
Right.
The intentions are about being devious. It's about, how do I prosper at your expense? So I think when you and I are being audited, as much as it's awkward, it's also with a free spirit, because you want to share and you want to grow out of it. You want that value that everyone seeks to grow in the right direction, because your intent has not been to pull the wool over someone's eyes.
Right.
Unlike an investigation where if you're dealing with a perpetrator, their intention was very different. And so that awkwardness comes in. but with it, the skill of deception
Mhm.
with the seasoned fraudsters, you'll never know the difference between someone who is just being ordinary versus someone who deep down is nervous.
No, and that's true. And as a business owner, you are going to face audits for different reasons, right? They're workers' compensation, for example, right? If you have workers' compensation, they're going to come in and they're going to take a look at your books every year, and they're going to ask you for things. And when you're going, wow, like, why do you need to look at that? And it's even funny too, because you'll get different auditors, right? So you'll have one person that's going to want to look at something, and then you get somebody else who may want to look at some other things. And you're like, okay, but it was satisfactory for the other person for this. Well, like, why are you asking for more? I had that happen recently, and I questioned it. I'm like, well, what are you looking for? Like, what do you think's going on here? And it sometimes it's that question of talking through, right? So it's the auditor themselves, like, not being so deceptive as to what they're looking for, but saying, hey, I have an issue with this. It looks funny to me. Can you explain it a little bit further to me? And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, no problem. Let's talk it through. And you talk it through, and you come to a resolution on it. Nobody's trying to be a fraudster or anything like that. It's just they didn't understand why something was filed a certain way. So I've seen that happen too. And then obviously you start talking about financing, you're going to get a line of credit or something like that. There's going to be an audit. They're going to want to take a look at things, and and then obviously taxes, right? You file your business taxes, your personal taxes, and that's the thing there. So then you start talking about, okay, those are the regular things you get audited for. Now,
Right.
also in business, there are other reasons too, and especially when a fraud is, alleged to have taken place. So why don't you walk me through kind of what that looks like? What are you getting involved for to do an audit typically?
So quite often you find that when you're going in to do an audit, it's a statutory requirement, or it's something that the entity has engaged you to do, either because of, as I say, statutory requirements, or they have the intention to grow out of it.
Right.
So it's a voluntary audit where somebody wants to achieve something. And you find that you start off with all good intentions, but our audit standards over the years have actually moved to require of us as auditors a greater level of skepticism. Because you talk of audit by interview, so you and I can have a discussion about how you've accounted for everything, that you've got the documentation, but if I never see the documentation, I'm going away with nothing more than what you've purported to be on paper.
Right.
Yet the responsibility of an audit, when we issue an opinion, is to build confidence in the people who are then relying on that report, who are then expecting certain things in terms of what that report means to them.
Right.
Even though technically I can say, but this is what my standard says, the question is, what is the layman out there reading into that? So over the years, it's been a fine balance between trying to get the technical side to be upheld, but
Right.
bringing it closer to talking to the expectation gap. That's always been there. So if I just step back a little and I say, I put myself in the shoes of an investor, and it could be a stakeholder from many aspects, investors, employees in large corporates where this is their bread and butter. How do they fulfill their life's expectations is by going to work every day.
Sure.
If the company is gone rogue and they're going to lose their livelihood tomorrow, they're a stakeholder who's interested to know that something's gone wrong.
Absolutely.
So the stakeholders are vast, and the requirements over the years of auditors has grown and grown more in the space of detection and identification of fraud in the course of doing an audit.
Sure.
Because admittedly, the deception will always take people away from that which is quite obvious.
Right.
And when you're going to do an audit, you cannot be in investigative mode, but you are expected to identify the so-called red flags. So as an auditor, you're going in to say, yes, I need to build confidence. I am going in to audit against a set of standards or accounting norms that are expected to be upheld. However, I'm also serving the stakeholders who are expecting me to see a fraud when it is there. So it
Right.
must not hit me on the head and I must not identify it.
Right.
And when we look at some of the massive corporate failures, they say hindsight is 20/20 vision. After the event, everyone sees all the red flags that were there in front of them.
Yeah. Or
I'm
green
reminded of
pens.
one specific one in Enron,
Yeah.
where many people who analyzed the very same accounts came out after Enron had broken to say, ooh, how did we not see this? That there was growth over 10 years on the top line, but there was no growth in the cash. Surely something was wrong. So these things are easier to see after the event, but it's only because you're now looking for something that's
Sure.
gone wrong.
Yeah. The
When
fight's,
you go in,
fight's
you've got to
gone out there.
go in with an independent mindset,
Yeah.
but that skepticism to say, corroborate what is shared with you, make sure the documentary evidence is there, that starts opening the can of worms.
Sure.
So I no longer trust what Matthew says to me. I say to him, so yes, great, that's fine. Now show me the evidence. That's where the cookie crumbles.
Sure. So let's talk about integrity. Let's talk about, like that's the subject that you wrote about. Like, why is that so important in the field of investigations or audits, certified fraud examination? Like why, like what's integrity's role in all that, in your opinion?
So integrity is all about doing what one expects you to do. So when I come in as an auditor, you've invested in a company. I spoke of the expectation gap a short while ago. You have an expectation that as a professional, I have certain skills, I have certain knowledge, and I have certain capabilities to be able to identify that which is glaring at me. Yes, you as a layperson might not pick it up, but that is why I am the professional. That is why I'm getting paid to go and fulfill that role.
Right.
And when I hold myself out as an auditor or an investigator, I'm expected to have that skill come to the fore and not be asleep at the wheel. Because if I'm asleep at the wheel, then the crash is going to happen and I might be in the vehicle or I might have gotten off the vehicle, but in any event, there's going to be a smash. And the question is, when you take the responsibility, and I quite often use the example of a medical practitioner. So I go in to see my doctor, I'm very unwell, and I can just imagine if he looks at me and for the next 10 minutes, he scratches his head and starts riffling through pieces of paper to say, I actually don't know what this means. You're very uncomfortable because suddenly you're encountering somebody who doesn't know their stuff, yet you expected them to. And that is what integrity is about. It's about fulfilling the expectations that your qualifications, your skill that you purport to have, and your capabilities, and bringing that to the game.
Sure. Sure. So as somebody who's a reader and is either going through school or trying to brush up on their skills and get better at what they're doing, what would you hope that the reader of your chapter would come away from if they had one glaring nugget that they could pull out of it that they would find most beneficial?
So, Matthew, when I started writing this, I thought of how do I share something that was so impactful in my life that centered me to become trustworthy. It was to share thoughts of some very basic elements that we are taught of from the time we are little kids to the time I think we go back into our graves, is to do the right thing, is to be consistent, and if you don't know, make sure you fill the gap.
Sure.
They're simple principles. They are principles that are applicable irrespective of your title. And what we find quite often is when people have a title or they've got accomplishments, they actually believe that those are the things that are going to carry them through.
Right.
Quite often, that is the thing that allows you to miss steps. And we know what happens when you're running fast and you miss a step, there's a risk that you will fall.
Sure.
And as professionals, when we do fall, we don't just take our names down, we sometimes take an entire profession down.
Right.
And we can create one major disaster can create a lack of trust and faith for an entire community, for an entire profession, for an entire country. When
Right.
we saw the audit failures and the failures of big corporates, way back when we had the credit crunch and the collapse of some of the larger corporates, people lost faith in big business. People
Absolutely.
lost
Yeah.
faith in the economies of certain countries, and we saw the spiraling effect worldwide on people and their livelihoods. I live in a country where perhaps we had one of the biggest fraud cases ever in history, called Steinhoff. And it didn't just shake people in our country, it had an impact throughout the world. Matthew, it was so impactful that it even dropped the value of people's pensions, investment and
Right.
pension fund monies. So it is simple principles. I want anyone, irrespective of the stage they are in their life. You could be one of the most experienced investigators. You could be an experienced professional in whatever walk of life. To remember the basics that keep you grounded, because
Sure.
even the tall tree can be uprooted by the little roots that give way on the ground.
You never know. You never know. Well, this is great. So I appreciate you taking the time and coming on and talking a little bit about that and your experiences on how that's so important. I mean, as someone who's getting into investigations or fraud examination or things like that, like integrity is everything. If you don't have credibility, you're never going to make it in this business, especially realizing that you have to testify in court. And how are you ever going to build rapport with a juror, or let alone a witness or anything like that, if you don't have integrity in what you do? So it's really one of those staples, one of those behavior patterns that's so important with what we do. So Raj, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you everybody for checking this segment out. So it's the Art of Investigation Revisited. Dr. Chelsea Binns and Bruce Sackman are the editors. Raj is one of the chapter writers here. You'll have the link in the show notes of how to get the book, and also Raj's contact info if you had any questions. So thank you, Raj, for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Matthew.
Okay, everybody sit tight. We have one more segment, and then we'll wrap things up.
Specializing in the research of liability for personal injury claims, Pacific Liability Research offers insurance assessments of all applicable liability coverages to help determine what a case is potentially worth. Have a case with no insurance policy? Since 2019, the highly trained staff on their insurance discovery team has located over 100 million plus in previously unknown insurance coverage. They offer a full refund for any inaccurate results, and they do not charge for no-hit searches. Additionally, Investigators Toolbox members automatically receive 50% off their first case. Just mention Investigators Toolbox when you fill out your first order. More information can be found at pacificliability.com. Contact them today and discover the immediate impact that Pacific Liability Research can provide. Satellite Investigations has launched its new website full of great new content. Matt and his team have released some great informative blogs. Make sure you log into LinkedIn and follow Satellite Investigations for the latest content. Finishing up the series, we're chatting with John A. Hoda. John's truly an industry veteran and also a fellow podcaster. John wrote about creativity. Here's John and Matt on our last segment.
And welcome to the next segment of PI Perspectives. We are rounding out this 3-episode take on the Art of Investigation Revisited. I want to say we saved the best for last because the last is a good friend of mine, somebody who I haven't talked to in a long time, a mentor, as you would have it in the podcasting world. I want to welcome John A. Hoda to the segment. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate being on. And I appreciate having the opportunity to have been an author and contributing author in that second book.
Yeah. It's been great. It's been so nice to be able to talk to a bunch of the authors and just getting their perspectives on these issues, these things, these skills that you need to learn, not just the hard skills of how to get a job done, but these soft skills. Being successful, whether it be a business owner or somebody who's actually working for somebody. So
you were tasked with writing about creativity, which I think is perfect because you are a creative fellow. So tell me a little bit about it.
Well, I was given a choice and of different topics, and as you said, the soft subjects, but they are really the drivers of what I think go into mindset for investigators before they even start a case or start working on anything. And I saw that creativity was open, and I jumped on it. There was a reason why I did, is that I always felt that there was as much art as there was science in the art of investigating. And there was an opportunity, I think, in my career to explore different ways to approach different cases and to use your noodle a little differently. And I did. I honestly did, first as an insurance fraud investigator, and then later as an SIU investigator, and then with a couple of different iterations in private investigations.
Right.
I was able to do that. And I spoke from experience in the chapter, and I gave a few examples, and it really was very enjoyable to write that for Chelsea and Bruce.
Man, you got it easy too. You just had to write a chapter. It's not like a book.
I know, but then as you see in the background there's a few books there,
It's a couple.
and they all required a little bit of creativity, and I'm really happy that I've done that. What I'm circling back to just the chapter itself, it required some research to understand, to deconstruct what creativity looks like for an investigator. And I really enjoyed the process, trying to understand how I did things without really thinking about them. And then to see someone with an expertise in it talk, oh, this is why like this is why this is why that is. And I'm thinking, oh, that explains things. So yeah, it was enjoyable.
So being able to reflect back on your experiences and figuring out, you did these things a certain way and not realizing, the creativity behind it, why you did it, right? Yeah, I mean, it's important, and creativity is such an important factor when you're tasked with trying to accomplish something, right? How do I get from point A to point B?
Sure.
Especially if there's a roadblock in between, right?
Especially if there's a roadblock in between.
Trying to figure out your way, and in our line of business, stay within the law of what you're doing, right? Because you want your investigations all to be actionable, right? If they're not actionable, it's a waste of time. And it's a balance. I think it's through experience you learn how to be creative, but I think you also have to have that kind of knack for it as well, right?
You say knack. When I hired people to work with me as a private investigator for my firm, I was interested in people that had curiosity and that they looked at things a little differently than the average bear.
Right.
And when I said look at things a little differently, they put a little different slant on things. And that plus, looking at things a little differently, that means they were observing things that a lot of other, investigators wouldn't even see. And then being curious about it, it would start a series, a cascade of what if. And I felt that I could teach the hard skills, statement taking, locations, at the time, the very rudimentary means of locating people. But teaching those intrinsic skills, curiosity and observation, were something that I either had it or you didn't. I mean, like in basketball, a coach will say, I can't coach height, so.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, there is definitely some sort of a predisposition to doing this kind of work. But
I think so. I do.
But I think those that excel in it figure out a way to really hone in on it. And listen, there are much more resource tools these days than there were back in the Stone Ages when Mr. Hoda began his career.
Thanks.
There's more than a flint and some sticks to light that fire.
Yeah, I often joke I was a cop so long ago I carried a 6-shooter.
There you go. Right.
But, yeah, no, but I think to your point, Matt, it's there's also the opportunity to talk with your peers and see what worked for them and why it worked, and then listen to stories and how people came about their solutions in their cases. I think there's also an opportunity, as I mentioned in the book, to learn from fiction. I often say, and I'm not bashful about saying it, I probably learned more from the complete adventures of Sherlock Holmes than I did from a half a dozen of my college textbooks.
Sure.
Now, I don't want to say that about a college textbook, but in terms of what A. Conan Doyle did with the Sherlock Holmes character and the way he had Dr. John Watson narrate what Holmes was observing or how he came to his deductions. I think it was a masterclass, quite frankly, and it just woke my eyes up to saying, yeah, things don't always aren't always what they appear, or if you're too slanted in some direction before you even start your investigation, you're going to miss out on so much opportunity to see what actually is in front of you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I would also say that there's a lot to learn from fiction, not so much TV and movies because they move so fast,
Right.
but I think from reading, I think if you can by doing this type of reading, it can whet your appetite for understanding more, wanting to learn more.
Absolutely.
And if you learn more about the craft of being an investigator from different sources, you're always trying different things, looking at things differently, trying a different approach. And I often say that, failure was my biggest teacher. I would fail at something, and I'd say, now, how the heck do I fix that so that it doesn't happen again? Or what do I do differently next time to get a different result? And I often joke that my ability as an investigator was because I made all my mistakes previously, because I couldn't make any more mistakes.
There you go. You're fresh out of mistakes.
Yeah, that's right.
You've gone through it all. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, man. Like I think people of a certain age, and this is, pre-internet and all the distractions that are out there these days, because there are tons and tons and tons of distractions.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember as a kid, the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew,
Mm-hmm.
reading these things, going, "Wow, this is great." Sherlock Holmes, really just kind of learning. I think even logic games,
Sure.
doing logic games, Sudoku or whatever, whatever your fancy is, riddles. Riddles are great.
Mm-hmm.
And you reflect back on like Lord of the Rings, and the whole sequence with Riddle, with Smeagol and the riddles. Like, this was compelling, man. It's really, really, really cool how that all went down. And just doing those exercises to increase your brain power and your creativity on top of that. It's all part of the recipe for problem solving, right?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I often said that you make your own luck, and other people have said that, opportunity and persistence create, I think, a vibe that places you in a better position to succeed.
Sure.
And I think that works with investigation as well,
Yeah.
obviously. Here we are sitting on a Friday afternoon as we record this. I can tell you there's a half a dozen cases I made after 2:30 on a Friday afternoon. And I'm telling you, there's a lot of guys that were just thinking about, and gals just thinking about happy hour coming up in a couple of hours, and they weren't thinking about their next major case or their biggest case.
Yeah, I was having a conversation today about. Sorry to cut you off. I was having a conversation today with somebody about this. About when I started, and we were talking about cold calling, and how I had a job before I went into business where it required cold calling. I hated it. Mm-hmm. Hi, I'm Matt. You should buy whatever I'm selling. You don't know me, but buy it, right? I just absolutely detested it, right? But then when it became my own, when it became my business, when it became something that I loved to do, I was all in, and I could talk about it, even creatively talk about it, problem solve on the spot. Okay, how would you solve this problem, right? Because it was something that I loved to do. I had a passion behind it, right? So I think passion is something that is necessary for creativity as well. And if you talk about, John or Jane looking for happy hour at 5:30, those are people that are not passionate about what they're doing, right? Those are not creative people.
No, not at all. And I think that when I bellied up to the bar, at a conference, I was at the conference to learn something, and I was also there to learn from other people. Usually I was picking the brain of the speaker or somebody that was close to the speaker at one of the conferences, and to try to learn more and more about what, the subject matter was at the time. It wasn't necessary for me to tell my war stories. It was me to learn from the people that were there. And that became very important for me. A lot of reading, a lot of text reading after I left the university, after I left the police academy. I went on to vacuum up everything I could on investigative interviewing, as you know. And it just became any course that I could take on investigative interviewing, I did, because I felt that for me, in the pre-internet era, that talking to people and getting on their wavelength and extracting information that was helpful was paramount.
Sure.
And to me, that was a lifelong study. And I mean, when I say lifelong, I'm talking about 40 years.
Yeah.
And anybody, I once had a conversation with a coworker who said, "Yeah, I probably forgotten more than you even know." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry about your dementia."
Exactly.
It's like, "Oh, really? Okay." But I mean, it was like, did the guy, it was a guy, did he work 20 years and did the same thing every year for 20 years? Or did he have a building block approach to his investigations? And then by the time he hit his 20th year, that he had a consummate resume of investigative skills, to go by. But,
So one of the things that I remember about your guide on taking witness statements, something that it's extremely creative, and that's why we're talking about it right now. But it has always stuck with me. There was a portion where you were talking about, conducting an interview, completing the interview, closing your notebook or putting your statement away, and then continuing the conversation, and then trying to develop more information, and then saying, "Hey, do you mind if I amend what I just did? I just want to make sure I get everything down here, or just add a little more." And how incredibly creative that was to create a relaxation for the subject to say, "Okay, the interview's over. Whew, I'm glad that's over. Now I can really talk a little more freely." But he doesn't realize that the interview is still going on.
No.
And that you're going to be making changes as needed to the statement, which I thought, the first time I heard that, I was like, freaking genius, man. It's such good. And how creative was that, for you to figure that out and say, I'm going to socially engineer this guy or gal into really telling me what I need them to tell, or get the full truth out of them because they're not relaxed about it. I always thought that was amazing.
Always was interested in, I call it post-interview comments. And it was also, to understand what theme they wanted to develop after the story was over, after they had told their story. What did they want to say? In psychiatric or sociology terms, it's, I forget the exact term now because I'm getting older.
You got that dementia that you were talking about with that guy.
Yeah, that's it. The door handle comment, that, the person's walking out the door, they have their hand on the door handle and say, "Oh, by the way," and they hit you with the most important thing that you could have probably heard.
Harry Mason. That's Harry Mason 101.
And it was just, and it was the person, not so much Columbo coming
Right.
back, but it was the person wanting to talk about the most important thing to them that they didn't talk about when they were 45 minutes on the couch with the psychiatrist, or an hour with the social worker. It's what they really wanted to talk about. And to me, I just wanted to capture that in a way that allowed them the freedom to do so without feeling that I'm still there, pen poised over the paper, waiting for the next words out of their mouth. It was like I was more calm and more relaxed. I had one situation where I completed the interview. It was a criminal defense case. It was a witness to the assailants walking up the street prior to robbing and shooting a man in his car. And I finished the statement. I was wrapping things up, and I was just chatting with the young girl and her mother because I needed to have the parent there. And I was just saying, my client's going to be very happy with this situation because the police didn't explore this with you during their conversations with you. And at one point, I let my client's name slip. And it was a slip. It truly was a slip. And the young girl looked at me and said, "I know him. I went to grade school with him." And I said, "And he wasn't one of the kids walking up the street in front of you on the way to robbing the car?" And she said, "Heck no, it wasn't him. I know him. I know what he looks like. I know him." So quickly that piece of paper came back out again. It got amended, and it included that piece that one of the two assailants going up the street was not the client, and that to me was like the best identification I could have done.
Right.
And it was purely by having that after the interview conversation that it came out, and that worked. So it was like,
Amazing.
wow, amazing. Yeah.
Really good.
And I was there for a different reason. The police report had said that three men went up the street, and she told me only two went up the street. And that's why I wanted to, and these were guys that walked literally, her porch is 10 feet from the street. So she would know how to count and whether they were there or not.
Sure.
And then to find out the extra bonus that one of the two was not my client. That was just amazing. So anyway.
Awesome. So on the creativity scheme here, what would you say would be the one thing that you would hope the reader would pull away from your chapter with? What bit of knowledge about creativity would you hope they would glean?
That they wouldn't immediately go to a cookie cutter response, that they wouldn't immediately go to some checklist or some best practices approach, that they would actually let the situation sit with them for a while. Think about it. Think about the different permutations they would have.
Right.
And allow scenarios to emerge from their thoughts, and to think about it and dwell on it for a while before they start thinking, well, I need to do A, and then following A, I need to do 1, 2, and 3, and then I've got to do B. No, just kind of sit with it all and say, okay, here's the situation. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. And what could have possibly happened that I could still think about that might spark an idea.
Right.
And that is really it right there.
Well, that's good. So good.
What is it that I can would come to me as an idea of what really happened, and then how can I incorporate that into my investigation?
Sure. It's all good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, the book is The Art of Investigation Revisited.
Mhm.
It is edited by Dr. Chelsea Binns and Bruce Sackman.
Right.
Many amazing authors. I encourage everybody to go check it out. If you're looking to get into the investigative profession, this is a must-read handbook for you on all these amazing skills that you're going to need to be the very best at what you do. John, I want to thank you for coming on and holding the anchor here, the last spot, and just hitting a home run to drive the point home. So thank you, sir, for coming on. It's always a pleasure to see you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in and checking this out.
It was my pleasure, Matt. I'm happy to give a plug for the book because I think it should be required reading for every criminal justice major or anyone that is thinking about wearing a uniform and a badge.
Absolutely. And please go look up John Hoda and all the amazing books that he has. And about even like you got your fiction stories and you've got your a bunch of how-to books as well. And John, you've put together quite a lot of content. So thank you for that, sir.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me on today, Matt. I appreciate it.
Yep. We'll catch everybody next time on the next episode. Take care.
Thanks for checking out the show. Please make sure you follow PI Perspectives on the YouTube channel. What a great amount of knowledge that was just shared. Please make sure you pick up a copy of The Art of Investigation Revisited. We had a lot of fun in this 3-part series, bringing you some insight from the authors. The link's in the show notes. And a warm welcome to our newest sponsor, TrackOps. Please visit trackops.com to learn more and take advantage of this great case management tool. We also want to thank Campbell Insurance Group for sponsoring our show. Remember to tell them you listen to save $50 when you apply for insurance. Additional thanks to Scope Now, Pacific Liability Research, and the PI Institute for Education for sponsoring our show. Also, don't forget about investigatorstoolbox.com, where you can type in Perspectives 50 to save $50 when you sign up. And please also follow Matt and Satellite Investigations on LinkedIn. If you have a question or a comment about the show, email Matt at matthews@satellitepi.com. You can also find him on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. We'd like your feedback to bring you the best shows possible, and we'll be back next week with a new show, so make sure you tune in and stay safe out there.